Okay, so now I've finished fabricating and moderately contouring my provisional restoration. I've adjusted the contacts, occlusal contacts, and the interproximal contacts. So now at this stage, what we're going to do, and this is where the fun begins, is we're going to hollow out this provisional restoration. And because the next stage, what we're going to do is we're going to pack our core. So we're going to prepare the tooth. In this case, I'm going to place a pin. So you can see, here's the preparation right here. We're going to build this up just with some amalgam. Now this is really helpful, especially during those large amalgam cores. Now, some would argue that you might actually be able to get away with retention if you bond this restoration. Literature shows, some folks suggest 3 millimeter axial height, axial wall, so 3 millimeters from your finish line to the occlusal, most occlusal portion of your preparation. Most folks advocate 3 to 4 millimeters of minimum height for retention, so we're kind of off on this side. So what we're going to do is we're going to place an amalgam restoration underneath this, and then use the provisional as the matrices. So the next stage what we're going to do is I'm just going to make a hole in the center and remove that provisional material. So here now you can see the crown has a big hole in it, so I've removed the occlusal portion of it. I've also, just like when you're doing a reline, if you know what I'm talking about, I've removed the interior aspect, the intaglio surface, and this is going to act as our amalgam matrix. Now I've kept the margin intact. There's just some dust there. Kept the margin intact because we're actually going to lute this down with a final luting agent. So with the preparation itself, you can see by now what I've done is I've removed, if there was a if you hadn't done so already, remove the remainder of the amalgam, the existing restoration. And so I did that. It was pretend. And then I placed a pin. Of course, a pin placement is fairly controversial. I've found that, when talking to clinicians, especially for another video, if they've never learned how to place pins, they don't place pins. But the literature still supports the placement of pins. We're going to do the best, actually. There's a literature article out there by Burgess and Schwartz, if I can remember correctly. The best is to have pin placement as well as amalgam bonding. So we're going to pretend that we're going to amalgam bond this as well. So you have to take in consideration when you're luting your provisional restoration. So what we're going to do now is we're going to place a final luting agent, so not a provisional or temporary, like temp bond, if you may. So something that's going to keep that on there, because keep the provisional restoration on the preparation. So lute it down definitively, if you may, just around the margin. Don't just placing your luting agent just on the margin, just to hold it on there. Let that set appropriately, or cure it, or whatever you have to do. And then use this now to pack your amalgam into the preparation, and then you're done. And then let it set typically 24 hours, and then you can have your patient return. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to place the amalgam restoration. If you opt to bond your restoration, I mean, you can do it perhaps now, or place your adhesive before placing the crown, placing it now. I mean, it really is up to you. Probably easier to place it now because you have protection against saliva. And I'm just going to place the entire spill of amalgam. Of course, every situation is different. Some folks like to, some folks don't. And one of the things to mention at this point is that there are several different types of amalgam you can use. I'm using Valiant PhD in this situation. You can hear the crunch, so it's an admix, which has certain benefits, but you can also use a spherical, which also has certain benefits as well in terms of initial compression, speed of set, and just handling as well. There's been, throughout the program, we're often taught trying to place, it's often recommended to place, use spherical around when you're placing pins, and if you need a fast set, high compression strength at 1 hour is fasciospherical. So say you want to prepare the tooth in this situation later that day, which may just, depending on the situation, might have to do. You might not be able to wait 24 hours for the patient to return back. You might want to use a spherical amalgam. And if you want some more information on that, by all means, you can discuss more amalgam choices. And the reason why, I mean, I didn't even know there were different types of amalgam. Actually, I wasn't taught that in school. Said use this and that's that. And then I never really didn't understand the difference between composition and different properties of amalgam. And although most folks are going resin in 2012, if you're viewing this in 2700, you might be laughing. In any event, amalgam is still a choice. Now, one of the things I've been thinking about is whether or not this is a viable technique for, say, a resin buildup, and I'm not sure. I'll have to try it out. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm using that as the matrix, and then what we're going to do afterwards, subsequent after this sets, we're just going to section the matrix and finish off the preparation. And off we go. We'll definitely have to do our depth cuts, but this serves as a really easy way to pack that, place your amalgam foundation restoration. I mean, this is much easier than using a Toffelmeyer band or even the auto matrix or any type of matrix, because those sometimes you need stabilization, and the textbooks show some interesting methods of stabilization, from using dental compound to splinting even with a copper band. I don't know if anyone does that anymore. So I'm just going to remove the excess amalgam. We don't need to, at the surface of this, we don't need to make it too snazzy or sexy, if you may. I will, just for intents and purposes. So what we would do now, and actually I just prepared one of these teeth. My colleague had suggested this to another clinician, and the patient was referred to me, and I just removed this, and it made the clinical procedure much simpler, as the margin was already prepared. We just needed to do the occlusal reduction and finish the margins, pack the cord, and off we went. Now, the key thing that I noticed this morning is making sure that your provisional restoration has the finish lines are clean, because that will affect your gingival tissue. And that's what happened. It was a little bit, there was some luting cement, some excess cement sort of sitting around the gingival margin, and made the gingiva quite irritated. So there was a bit of an inflammatory reaction to that margin, and actually the margin of the crown was a bit over contoured and extended into the sulcus, so that played a little bit of hamper. However, this is definitely a viable technique. So the next stage, like I've said, when this is set, have the patient return, we're going to just prep this. You'll have to prep this to remove it, and then finish off your preparations and finalize the margin. We'll see what it looks like afterwards. Cheers.